To learn more about Adlerian theory and also especially practice, which comes from the work of the Austrian psychotherapist and medical doctor Alfred Adler, today I'm talking to Professor James Robert Bitter. Professor Bitter is a nationally certified counselor, a diplomate in Adlerian psychology, and an Adlerian counselor with individuals, couples, and families. Professor Bitter is also the author of the books Contributions to Adlerian Psychology and Adlerian Group Counseling and Therapy, and has published a number of other books on couples and family counseling. Professor Bitter is associated with the Department of Counseling and Human Services of the East Tennessee State University, and obviously, like me, holds a special interest in Adlerian counseling and therapy. Professor Bitter, thank you very much for being here with me today. I appreciate, as I said already, you making time on a short notice and helping me meet this deadline and discuss this very interesting topic.
My pleasure.
Yeah, it's great that you're here. I'd like to start with a question on Adlerian psychology, because it's considered very practical and goal-oriented. Could you please share with me, the viewers and listeners, what is the essence, in your words, of Adlerian psychology and how this typically can help us?
Okay, well, the notions of Adlerian psychology that seem most important to me and that were transformative in my own life was, first of all, the notion of Gemeinschaftsgefühl, which is roughly translated in English as community feeling, but has a much larger sense than, it's not just the community that I live in, or even the community of a particular country. It is the community of humankind, and not just humankind for right now, but humankind from the past and projected to what it could become all the way into the future. It is humanity perfected. And when we think about that and what our place is in it, then the reason, for instance, that I don't litter is not because my little tiny gum wrapper is going to make a hill of beans difference in the world, but because if I gave that same right to virtually everybody in humankind forever, we'd be living in nothing but garbage.
Yes.
The reason that I smile at people or greet them, even if I don't know them, is not because my greeting will transform their lives forever, but because for a moment in time, it adds a piece of happiness in the larger world, in the community of humankind.
Yeah.
So the very practical aspect of having a sense of being part of the flow of humanity is that you also you're doing things in a way that help you care for humanity, help you make a difference in everyday lives.
Yes.
Second notion of Adlerian psychology that's really important to me is that we are not limited by our heredity or by our circumstances or our past.
Yes.
Those are just facts. They're just building blocks in our life. And we still have the opportunity to choose the best possible lives for ourselves and for others in our lives.
Yes.
That we are moving through life toward goals.
Yes.
And the largest goal we have is that we will become whole, complete, perfected, successful. Adler called that a life goal. And that all the intermediate goals in between line up with that larger one. And somewhere around 5 or 6, which, let's be really clear about this, it's really easy to make mistakes at 5 or 6 years of age, but we start to form this life goal. And once we kind of have a picture of what we would be like if we were fully complete and whole and happy and just good. We would then orient all of our thoughts and our feelings and our actions toward reaching that goal. Now we all know the goal is fictional. We're never going to be perfect. We're never going to get there, but it guides us. It gives us something towards which to move.
Yeah. And you said that this has been really striking for you, or these two elements. Can you share also on a personal note how that worked for you, or why this was particularly relevant? Because later on I have a question, or I've answered that question myself regarding the book, The Courage to Be Disliked, and there were also some parts that really stood out for me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can tell you that. Okay, so when I was born, that would have been 1947. I'm 75 now.
Yeah.
I'm clearly being born just after World War II, and apparently I was born to somebody who was in the Navy, because I was born in the Naval Hospital in the state of Washington. And about 6 months after I was born, I was adopted by Greg and Betty Bitter. And, they were my parents. And, I'm sure that there were some lovely birth people out there somewhere, but I've never met them. And I've actually never had much of an interest to meet them, although I would love to know how long they lived in life and a few other health concerns. But other than that, Greg and Betty Bitter were my parents. And my father was just slightly more Catholic than the Pope. At one point, the Pope decided it was okay to eat meat on Friday. My father said it was a sin one week, it's a sin this week too, and the Pope was just delusional. So in his mind, Catholicism was super important. And for me, it was a long time too. And I got good Catholic school education. But the more that education came into play, I went to a Jesuit institution, and they encouraged us to think for ourselves.
Yes.
And the more I did that, the more some of the beliefs involved in Catholicism didn't fit for me.
Yeah.
And like many young people, I threw the baby out with the bathwater, and I just stopped going to church for quite a while. Yeah. And I needed something to kind of guide me. What was really right and wrong? What was good and bad? And encompassed in Adlerian psychology is this notion of being part of humanity and the community of life, and that you have to make a difference. You have to live your life in such a way that you contribute to the whole.
In a positive way, yeah.
Yeah, and that we are all connected to each other, and that we all have a responsibility for the well-being of each other.
Yeah.
So that was kind of my moral guideline for a long time. Recently, I've been able to reconnect it with some aspects of religion, although I'm an a-religious person, and some aspects of spirituality. But the reality is that for a long time, that got me through. The other thing is that, I made tons of mistakes in life. I was not necessarily either a good person or a reasonable person. And over time, I had to come to kind of understand myself, and this notion that I was moving towards some goals in my own case, a goal to be accepted and to be valuable, and to try to be seen as a person who makes a difference in life. There are useful ways of getting there and useless ways. I tried out many of the useless ways before I kind of reoriented towards the useful side. And so Adlerian notion of movement, and that you can change and that you can choose a different way of doing things, those were all very, very significant in my life.
Yes. Yeah, for me too, actually, the element of choosing how we respond to what happened. And what you said before at the beginning, I think that's also the notion, as they call it in the Courage to be Disliked, that there is no trauma. Trauma doesn't exist. And actually, it's what we make of it. And it's all just the building blocks. And we can choose to look at it as something that's holding us down or is keeping us small, or we can see it as something that actually expands us and builds us.
Yeah, I recently retired, and I just last week picked up The Courage to be Disliked and started reading. I'm only about a third of the way in, actually, but yeah, I disagree slightly with the wording.
Okay.
Trauma in fact does exist, but it doesn't have to be determinative.
Yeah,
it doesn't have to then take over the rest of our lives. There are, if we look at some of the current trauma work, it is largely involved in trying to help people achieve almost a calm stance in relation to the experience.
Yes.
Well, I'm okay with that. But I also think that, you know, if from the trauma I learn that life is dangerous, that I cannot possibly stand up to it, that I am doomed forever to have nightmares or to have flashbacks, or to, then the part of that pessimistic thinking is certainly going to maintain the trauma experience in my life.
Yes.
So what do I want to replace that with? But I'd like to replace that with, you see, the biggest problem for me with trauma is that you become self-absorbed with it. So I would like to help people then find their connection in others. And, you know, it's amazing how fast your trauma gets better if you're out helping other people who have been traumatized.
No, that's true.
It's amazing. Like, you know, I have a friend who literally started counseling psychology in Hong Kong. And at one time he told me that when he was working with people who came in Hong Kong who were depressed, one of the things he would ask them to do is go find somebody more unhappy than they were and cheer them up. And that to me, he wouldn't think of himself as an Adlerian, but that's a perfectly Adlerian conceptualization.
Yeah.
That, you know, the way out of your own self-pain is to get involved in being useful and helpful to other people.
It's a very interesting point, and I really agree with it. Also from personal experience, I had quite an interesting experience in this regard. I've built a business in Myanmar, and we had some issues there, and I was really couldn't see the forest from the trees, and was experiencing some overwhelm and some elements of self-pity, like how am I going to solve this? And my business partner, who's 20 years my senior, he said, Julius, forget all about that. Do the following. You do 5 good things, both for yourself and also for other people. and especially actually focus on other people, like also you suggest. And after those 5 things, or maybe even before you reach number 5, your mindset and your energy will have shifted. And actually, it's so true. And every time that I have a similar experience, this comes back into my mind, and I try to practice it. And as you said, well, help someone who's worse off than yourself. And actually, that's a very good point. And indeed, it's central in Adlerian theory. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple that live at the top of my block. And I'm always amazed every year, they're both doctors and they make a lot of money. And I'm always amazed at what color of BMW they've chosen this year as they're driving down. And I'm looking at my, old Nissan with the dents in it and all the other stuff, and thinking, I'm just not as well off as they are. But all I have to do is drive about 4 blocks in my dented Nissan, and I see this guy pushing a grocery cart full of cans and plastic bottles that he's hoping to recycle for a few bucks at best.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, my Nissan feels much better.
Yeah.
And I just think about, built into us is this kind of natural movement towards comparison.
I was going to say,
and comparison is a killer.
Yes.
Because unless you take the time to go see that other guy that you're better off on, you will always come up with the notion that you're not as well off as someone else, or you're not as smart as someone else, or you're not as happy as someone else.
Yeah.
90% of the families I see think they are the only family having troubles in the world. And we're all having. If you have children, you are making mistakes every day.
Yeah.
And
probably even without children. Yeah.
Well, maybe even without, but certainly with them, because children force you into interactive mode, and interactive mode brings out both our best and our worst.
Yeah, true.
So we are, if we think that we're the only family in the neighborhood who is having troubles, we are greatly mistaken by that.
Yeah, and the point of comparison, it really doesn't serve us. And I think one element that's up for improvement, at least in my view, in the world today, is the fact that we have all these social media platforms where we are continuously bombarded with the best side of ourselves, which we portray proudly to the world, or compulsively even. And it doesn't do justice to reality. As you say, all it takes is drive a few blocks and we see the reality for what it is. I think an interesting part, and this I feel also relates to it, of Adlerian theory, is that we have to separate what's our work and our tasks from the tasks of others. And I think also the element that this is all linking into, it's the kind of getting approval from other people and making other people responsible for actually what we need to do for ourselves, is having self-confidence, having courage. And I think when we do this comparison, or this comparing with other people, we put that task, which is actually our own, outside of us. Can you say something about this process and this premise in Adlerian theory of the division of tasks, basically?
Yeah. So in the Courage to be Disliked, they really link that concept to true freedom.
Yeah. Freedom
being that I know who I am, I know what I stand for, and because I express that clearly and with people who are important to me in the world, there are going to be other people who disagree and who dislike me because of it. And I can't change who I am just because somebody might be unhappy with me or
Yeah,
dislike me.
to please someone else.
Yeah. My daughter, I have two daughters, and they're both young adults now, but they've lived their entire life on social media. And, no wonder their generation is more anxious
Yeah.
than my generation was. If I, did a group of girls snicker at me when I walked by in high school? Sure. But they were just a group of girls, and I had my own friends. And there was nowadays, if somebody decides to make me feel badly on social media, there can be thousands of people involved in that.
Yeah.
And that can really do a job on yourself if you let all that external incoming decide who you are.
Yeah.
So that's important. Before the courage to be disliked, you also need what Sophie Lazarfeld, she was an Adlerian psychotherapist in New York when Adler was there, called the courage to be imperfect.
Yeah.
And Dreikers adopted this kind. Dreikers was one of Adler's main colleagues and students, and he adopted this concept and used it even more than Sophie. But basically, it's the courage to be simply human.
Yeah.
To accept ourselves as flawed, as making mistakes, and just getting on with life. The reality is that everybody makes mistakes, and sometimes those mistakes hurt other people. But the response to making a mistake is you give a really sincere apology, and then you try not to do the same thing again.
And you move
on. It is
on.
not to beat yourself up with guilt. It is not to shame yourself or run into hiding or withdraw from life or any of those.
Yeah.
It's just, okay, it was a mistake. I'm sorry. Let's see if we can make this better.
Yeah.
Now, Adler also said there are basically 3 tasks in life that we all have to do. And this stuff it's linked to evolutionary psychology. It's linked clearly to Darwin. The first task of any species is to survive.
Survival, yeah.
Yeah. And the second task is to build in safety. But after that, we get into what does it mean to, I assume a gazelle gets into what does it mean to be a gazelle? And I assume a human gets into what does it mean for us to be human? Well, in order for us as a human species to have survived, first of all, early humans were a mess. Poor eyesight, terrible teeth, no claws to speak of, speed of a large snail. I mean, we were a disaster. We should not be here. Walk too near an elephant, we would have been squished. If a cheetah decided to eat us, we're gone. Yeah. Thank God we weren't around during the dinosaurs. But if we were, we all have Jurassic Park, so we know what it looks like. What did we do? How did we make it? We did what any animal that individually can't make it does, like ants or bees. We formed into a herd, a community.
That's the social element.
We figured out how as a community to do what we individually couldn't do.
Yeah.
So the first task is a social task. It is forming relationships. It is being interpersonal. The opposite of that would be a schizoid personality disorder. That is, I don't need anybody. I don't want anybody. I am withdrawn from all other people. The second thing is, we can't all build houses. We'd have lots of houses, but no clothing, no food. So we have to have a division of labor.
Yeah.
So the second task is learning how to make a contribution. Adler called it the work task.
Yeah.
But you don't have to get paid for a job in order to do the work task. My mother didn't get paid, but she raised the children and she was a support to her husband and she did things in the community. Yeah. The work task is really about how are we going to use our time on this earth to make a difference in our own lives and the lives of others?
Yeah.
And we share things.
Well, like we are doing now, you're sharing with me your knowledge and experience, and I'm passing that on, hopefully, to people who read or watch this or listen to it.
Yes, and you're sharing your curiosity and your interest, and it is getting me to think in different ways. It's all interactive.
Yeah.
And the last task, because the species once survived has to go on, is for us to be involved in love and intimacy. Now, for Adler's day, and when Adler could not have imagined multiple genders beyond men and women. Could not have come to that concept.
Yeah.
And so he also talked about it in terms of marriage. But the reality is, we don't need men and women to produce a lot more babies. We need a few. My daughters have decided they're not having children, that the line ends with them. And that's perfectly fine. We have more people than the earth can handle right now.
Yeah.
Do we want everybody not to procreate? No, we still need a few procreators, but it doesn't have to be everybody. But
in a way, that's also helping community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And built into us, though, is still the need to bond.
Yeah.
The need to love someone and feel loved by someone. That's psychologically built into all of us, whether we have children in the long run or not. And it doesn't say that bonding has to be with the other sex. It can be with the same sex, or a person who claims multiple sexes, or a person who is gender free. It can be sex.
The labels don't matter for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We still have all this stuff. And so the basic things in life are: have friends, find something useful to do, find someone to love and be loved by.
Yeah.
And those are the things that give meaning to life.
Yeah.
So when you come in and you tell me, for instance, that you're depressed or you're anxious, I'm willing to try and help it do something to alleviate that. But I'm really much more interested in you telling me, what is your preferred life? How would it look if you had friends, if you were loved and had loved ones, if you were doing something meaningful? What would that be like? And let's see if we can build that into your life.
And that's the interesting part, because that's one of the key underlying principles in Adlerian theory, is that we are, as humans, we are social beings.
Absolutely.
And we seek that for comfort, there's a door closing, for comfort and love. But at the same time, it's causing all these relational problems and issues. Typically, because I'm also curious about that. Obviously, I've been into a number of relationships myself, and currently am. This social part, there's the benefit, but there's also the downside, because we have this part where we make other people responsible for our happiness in some cases, or we take too much consideration for their judgment or what they think or say about us. So what is the trick here? How to deal with this difficulty of social interactions from the perspective of Alfred Adler?
Well, if we just start with something easy, how about friendship?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I have a young man who came to me because he was sent to me, actually, by the head of his dormitory, because he had been in his room for 3 weeks. He had not come out, and he had not gone to classes, and they were concerned that, he was going to flunk out and be out on the street. He also wasn't at that point talking to his parents. And so, at any rate, he came over, and I suppose we could have found some really impressive DSM-5 diagnosis, but essentially he was suffering from loneliness.
Yeah.
And I said, does that sound right to you? And he said, yes. I said, well, thank God, I said, because we can handle that right away. I was afraid it was something serious.
And what did he say? Because I imagine
he said, you can handle this stuff right away. I said, oh, sure.
Yeah.
I said, but you will hate every minute of it. But at least you won't be lonely. And he said, okay, well, what do you have in mind? I said, well, you've just forgotten how to do friendship. Let's see if I can help you remember. Okay, here's the first thing. Rule number 1. No one comes and knocks on your dorm door and says, will you be my friend? So the first thing is you have to leave your room.
Yes.
Here's rule number 2. No one wants to be a friend with a really unhappy, dour-looking person. So you have to learn how to smile and walk outside and see and be seen with other people. He said, like what? I said, well, I want you just to start on the other side of campus, and I want you to smile and say hello to virtually everyone you pass. Now, there's 16,000 people on campus, and in between classes, there's hundreds of them everywhere. So he would be doing that everywhere he went.
Yeah.
And he said, and I want you to really look at them. Stop looking at your own navel and just really look at them when you smile and say, good morning, or hello, or how are you?
Yeah.
I want you to really look at them and see what they look like. And if one or two of them slows down, like maybe they think you know them, here's what I want you to say. I said, it'll be a lie, but it will be a good lie. He said, what? I said, don't I know you from somewhere? That's what I want you to say. And the person will look at it, and you say, maybe I'm just mistaken, but you look so familiar, and it was really pleasant to me. And see if a conversation starts.
Yeah.
And whatever the conversation is, from there on, you're not allowed to lie. But that's just the starter. And then do that with as often as you can. And when you get to the other side of campus, come and tell me what your experience was.
How fast did his life shift?
Well, we had to do 2 more sessions. And one of the sessions, I had to remind him that friendship meant showing up when people needed you.
Yeah.
And not showing up when they don't need you. That's called stalking, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
It also means that you can occasionally ask people for help, but you also have to be there to give them help when they ask for it. It's a give and take process.
Yeah.
I only measure things by what the person said they wanted in life. And what he wanted was to go back to being a regular person in college. And in a couple of weeks, he was doing that. So good enough.
You got unstuck. Yeah. Yeah. It's a very interesting example. And I think it also touches on the feelings of inferiority, because that results in neurotic behavior, and actually in the right setting, it can motivate us. But in the case of this example that you shared, it's someone who completely goes inwards and stays inside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Inferiority feelings are natural to everybody for everything.
Yes.
It's when they become so large, when we let them be so large, when we make them so large,
yeah,
that they keep us from moving. They keep us from being.
Yeah.
That's when they become a problem.
However, I think when you're experiencing this, like the student in your example, it's difficult as an individual to see this for yourself, that this is what you're doing, right? So
Yeah.
what are the tips and tricks in this regard, again, from the perspective of Alfred Adler? Or even from yourself? Obviously, you have a ton of experience in this regard.
Well, the reality is that the more you let inferiority overwhelm you, the more you are going to behave and do things in such a way as to protect yourself, which is to close off, to hunker down, as we say. Yeah. And once you do that, you stop seeing avenues out. So in some form, the way out of it is always going to be moving toward others, not maintaining the self-absorption. Now,
Yeah.
Does that take courage? Yes, it does. Does it also take seeing the world differently? Yeah. And part of that is the job of the counselor or the therapist, to be the person who sees what looking out would look like for that person, and for helping them see what the first steps are. Now, some people with large inferiority feelings don't express it by closing down, express it by adopting superiority feelings. That is, they're better, bigger, more important than anybody else, and that they can do anything in an extreme form. The person is narcissistic. I never think of narcissism as someone who loves themselves too much. I think of it more as, in my country, it's kind of male dominance disorder. It is, I'm in charge, I'm the biggest, most important thing in the world, and you better do what I want or else. And occasionally we elect such people as president and regret it, but nonetheless, for the most part, those are people. What Adler said is, the stronger the superiority, the stronger it masks inferiority. So you can always count that a person with a very strong superiority complex has an equally strong inferiority complex.
Yes. I think when we put this in relationships, for instance, this I imagine it results in people also making each other responsible, perhaps in a way, for how can I say this, for meeting their expectations or getting validated in a way that they cannot find with themselves. Is that the case also that you see in your experience as a counselor?
Yeah, the biggest problem. Okay, the most intimate relationships are those relationships in family or in between partners. Sometimes a husband and wife, but any partners. And there are situations in which I decide that my happiness depends on whether my partner is happy or my partner likes me.
Exactly.
And you know what happened? Like, one of the people I studied with was a woman named Virginia Satir, and she was a very famous family therapist. One of the things she used to say is that, we grow up and sometimes we create holes in us. And like, if my hole says, I'm really not lovable, then I depend on the other person to constantly reinforce that, no, you're still loved.
Yeah.
And the problem, of course, with that is that there's never enough that somebody can pour in that hole to fill it up. So the first thing is that I have to come to some understanding that I am okay the way I am. I am acceptable as just who I am. One of the points that is really made in the courage to be disliked is that you have to learn to, you start by accepting yourself.
Yes.
And that means not accepting yourself as some ideal, glorified person, but as a real human being who isn't perfect, but who is out there doing the best that they can.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I feel okay about me and you feel okay about you, we can come together, we can hug. And when we get done hugging, we can go apart and we don't feel lost. On the other hand, if I feel like I'm unlovable and I give you a hug and you kind of loosen up because you're done with the hug and I grip you tighter, it's kind of like me holding you so tight because I can't stand to make it without you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to smother that relationship.
Yes.
I'm going to kill that relationship. And so really, to start with, I have to know that mistake prone as I may be, I'm an okay person. I am lovable and I'm acceptable. Now, does that take personal work? Yes, it does. But it's also part of learning to get along with others anyway.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. The other part, though, is that we live in a world that is loaded with discrimination. And, sometimes I feel in the United States, there's a Canadian writer named Margaret Atwood who wrote a book called The Handmaid's Tale. And in it, she imagines a male-dominated patriarchal world where the wives no longer have babies. They just serve their husbands, and they're these handmaids who are constantly being literally raped in order to produce children for this community. And sometimes I actually feel like I'm lost in that book, and the only escape for me is north to Canada. But the reality is that even in the best of times, men and women have had a hard time having socially equal relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that, are we the same? Are you and I the same? No. Am I the same with my wife, my partner? No. But we each have, this is what social equality is. We each have the same right to be valued and respected. So in Adler's terms, a letter he wrote to his daughter, when she got married, he said, may the two of you be good friends, true friends. May the two of you look out for each other's well-being and be more concerned about that than you are about yourselves. This is the only safeguard in a relationship, that you are trying to make the other person's life valuable and happy. If each person does this, both people are protected.
Yes.
And so in a certain sense, that is the formula for helping people get to where they need to be with each other.
It's the same with friendship, as you said. What came up for me first was we have to give first. Actually, it's the thing in any relationship, in any social interaction. Actually, by definition, we are already losing, or we are one behind if we're expecting the other to have or to act in certain ways or to do certain things. I think we should keep ourselves responsible for taking that first step, or even sometimes the first 3 steps, or whatever it takes.
Yes.
And the same in relationship. I appreciate what you said. We have to kind of accept not only our own imperfections, but also, and that's an important one, also the imperfections of the other, and not project our expectations or our compensation onwards the other person. I think that's often the thing that leads to conflict in social interactions. It's our expectations.
Yeah. When people come in for couples counseling, they're not just I don't think of them as being disappointed in the other person. They're disappointed in what the ideal of the other person was going to be in their life.
That's a good point.
And, none of us are the other person's ideal.
Yeah.
My wife points out to me that I've been a project all her life. And I'm pretty sure that's true. I mean, we've been together over 40 years, and I think if she ever completed the project, she might get rid of me. But she's been working on me since we got married.
Still has hope that there's space for work. Yeah,
she does. She has hope for my growth all the time, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I think that when one of the things that couples have a hard time doing is really talking to each other about what's important in their lives and their sadness and their hurts, and really listening. Because see, the thing is, if you're responsible for my happiness and I'm responsible for your happiness, when you're unhappy, I'm to blame. And what happens then is I get defensive and I start to explain to you why it's really your problem, not mine.
Yeah.
And this is when we see them in couples counseling. And so really, one of the first things that almost always happens in couples counseling is getting people to really sit and really listen and really understand each other. In an Adlerian sense, I understand both people have a style of living and a way of moving through life. Mm-hmm. And those movements are now colliding. And so I want to help people take a step back, open up, listen, take the other person in, and then release them. In the end, sometimes if I can grow into what my wife needs, I become a better person. If she can grow into what I need, she becomes a better person. And to do that, we first have to understand what the needs and gains and losses are and how they're being experienced by our partners.
I think that's very true. And I also think that an important element to that is, you could say, embracing the imperfection, but also actually by being vulnerable. And yes, you mentioned the part of communicating. I think the really problematic part is, and this is again, this social thing, that we want to make a good impression because we don't want to be rejected, or we fear rejection. And therefore we upkeep a certain facade, or we keep wearing this mask, and actually it stands between us and that other person. It's actually the imperfection, and owning that imperfection, and perhaps sharing the ambition to change or to improve, that can connect people. We can connect to the other person being as faulty as we are. And I think that the imperfect part is something that we embrace way too little, actually, and it often stands in between us. Yeah.
I think another thing that happens is that a lot of people, myself included, feel a bit wounded from childhood.
Yeah.
And, a friend of mine says that if you're going to fall head over heels in love with someone, you will have sorted through all the people who would be good for you in life, and will have found the one person guaranteed to irritate you the rest of your natural life. And there's a reason for that. We had something that we feel was incomplete when we were little, that we wanted from mom or dad, or from an older brother, or from something in our world. And we went out and found somebody that kind of matched that. And then we insisted that they be better than the person was in our childhood.
Yeah.
And we're trying to kind of get that wound healed and met. And a lot of times, people don't know what their wound is until they really take the time to do some self-examination. And secondly, they're not clear about how they're demanding that the other person help meet it.
Yeah.
And if I know that what my spouse is asking of me is something to make life better, to heal a wound, or to just help her feel whole, I'm more likely to respond positively to that than I am to criticism that I'm not good enough, or that I'm not doing the right thing, or that I'm not meeting her needs.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting point. And actually, I think that if we are not present, and there's the element of being present and actively present in the here and now, which is something we rarely are able to do. But once we are, we can start to see these old wounds and see how our actions and our decisions are actually shaped by that. I think also this happens a lot in relationships where, because of that, we have this image, as you say, of something that has to complete that part that was missing, and we're not communicating about it. That just keeps a whole facade going, and it's a recipe for disaster, I imagine.
It definitely is.
Is this always the case, or often the case, or from your experience?
Well, you see, the thing that I have to, there's a small, tiny caveat. I have to remember that I'm a therapist and I only see people in trouble. I have never gotten to see people who are doing just fine don't get up one day and say, I think we'll go tell Jim all about it. Yeah. So true. Yeah, or people who come for counseling and for therapy. Yes. Yeah. It's pretty much always the case. Yeah. But there may be people out there who have kind of figured it out and who are really, I mean, I do know some couples who seem to be happy all the time. Yeah. And, you know, I'm never going to see them therapeutically, so they're doing just fine without me. Yeah. And I'm glad for them. And I don't know whether it was because of their philosophy or whether it was because of childhoods that meshed up beautifully, or because they were just people who were naturally open to each other and to meeting each other, enjoying each other's company, and kind of moving life ahead together. I mean, I do believe there are people who naturally do that, and that I will never see them in therapy. But the people I see in therapy, for a reason, they don't need it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, this has been very interesting. I want to be respectful of your time. There's one question that I always like to answer or ask at the end of a conversation, and it's what question about, and I'm sure there are many, obviously, but what central question or what question comes to mind about Alfred Adler, his work, Adlerian theory and practice, that I didn't ask, which I should have asked, a particular angle that I've missed, or is there something that comes to mind? Not that I can think of. I mean, I think that as an introduction to Adlerian thought, you asked all the right questions, and I enjoyed the ability to respond to them. You know, the question constantly on my mind right now is, I live in a country that is in a lot of pain, and is dysfunctional because we've lost a sense of community feeling, that we are more warlike. We live in a world in which an actual war is threatening all sorts of things, from famine in countries that will not get food from Ukraine,
Yeah.
to people who are, living like recently, and just in the United States, recently we ran out of baby formula, and
Yeah.
we did that because the supply chain is broken and because there aren't enough producers in the world getting stuff. And we have 2 babies in Tennessee who are in hospitals recovering right now, simply because of a break in a supply chain caused by a world in disarray.
Yeah.
And so I think about, the need for an international community feeling, a sense that we are all tied together in this world.
Yes.
We have to find a way. I mean, when a country or when a leader of a country invades another country, naturally the world is going to break down into good guys and bad guys, into enemies and survivors. And the problem with all of that is that it orients the war, okay, but it doesn't save the world. It doesn't do anything. I'm fairly certain that there's hundreds of thousands of Russian people who are really good people and who are, not intending for the babies in Tennessee to die. At some point, we need a global community, and we need a sense that of a global community feeling in which we are all in this together and we are going to take care of each other. And just because that's really hard to get to, doesn't mean that that shouldn't be part of our daily work. And so if I think about where does Adlerian stuff have to go from here, it has to help women get along better with men. It helps to help the people of color get along better with the dominant culture, and vice versa. It has to help children and adults get along better. It has to help countries get along with each other. And at some point, probably not going to be achieved in my lifetime, but what can we contribute? Little piece here, little piece there, like steps in friendship. How can we get to a point where, as a world, we learn to take care of each other?
I think it's a beautiful conclusion, and I'd love to add, because I think you're spot on, and the problem is that we're all stuck in polarities. And instead of the polarity, because we are all unique individuals, each and every one of us, some of us might look alike and other ones might not, but we are all in essence very different individuals. And I think when we can embrace the diversity, even in our own personal being, because obviously we also change over time. Actually, we change continuously. And if we can have more compassion towards that and also nuance, I'd say it would be a much, much better place. And as you said, or as we concluded with regard to friendship, we have to do this first. And the chain has to be broken, I guess, to stop this polarity to continue. And I think there's also obviously a responsibility of politicians. I know it's easy scoring to point in one direction, and that's why they do it. But it's definitely needed to, for this to change.
Yeah,
and
right on,
indeed,
brother.
The human connection is, since we're all part of the same community, ultimately, we breathe the same air.
Yeah, as Virginia Satir used to say, we all have navels, so we have naval equality.
Yeah.
We
Thanks so much for the talk. I appreciate it.
I've enjoyed it.
Me too. I'll stay in touch, and I'll keep you posted on the next post, which will be Monday.
That'll be great. Oh, by the way, I'm looking forward to it. There's a huge Adlerian summer school. It's called, the short name for it, and the way to search it is by going something called a ICASSI, ICASSI. And it's being held this summer in the Netherlands.
Really?
Yeah. And so I'm looking forward, I'm thrilled to first time I get to visit the Netherlands. We're coming first week in August.
Well, we have to be in touch. I'll invite you for a coffee or a meal, and we'll definitely meet. And I'll look into that. Maybe I'll even attend if it's possible.
It is possible, and it'd be great to see you.
Yeah, that'd be great. I appreciate that. And I'll ask you later via email for the link, because then I can add it also for the people who might want to join as well.
Very good.
Appreciate it. Have a great day.
All right.
Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.